Hi guys, so I recently did a top end rebuild on my 2016 YZ250. The bike had at the time about 36 hours from brand new on it. Still ran great, still made great compression, but I figured I'd do it anyway and make a quick video showing how to do it. So first things first, take the seat off as I already did, and then start removing gas tank. Gain access to your cylinder. Then start dismantling your exhaust system. The two bolts right behind the Kickstarter there, just to get things loosened up. And I cheated, I left the muffler on during this top end. You don't really have to take it off, but I mean it would help for the install. The lower bolt for the mount and the two exhaust springs. And if you don't have a spring puller, all I use is I just cut a little notch in a flathead screwdriver with an angle grinder. Works fine, like no issues whatsoever. Next most crucial step I would say is getting the whole work area clean before you get going. So here I'm just blasting everything with some shop air and some brake cleaner, some contact cleaner, getting some exhaust spooge out of the way. You don't want anything falling into the base of the engine when you're taking the cylinder off, so make sure it's nice and clean. Then go ahead and drain your coolant. Get yourself a catch pan. There's a little 8mm bolt at the base of the water pump cover. I think it's got a little copper gasket. And take the bolt out, and it'll only really weep out of there until you open the rad fill cap as it's doing there. See, it pisses out quite fast after that, so get ready to catch it. Next, start dismantling the head stay, the 3 bolts for the cylinder head stay. Next, go to the right side of the bike and take off the power valve linkage cover. It just pulls right off there. It's got a little gasket and a rubber gasket on the bottom. And next, grab a drill bit to fit in that little fork end there. You'll see a slot. The drill bit's there for you to put in for when you're loosening and especially tightening up this bolt, as it puts a lot of pressure on the power valve linkage, and you won't damage anything if you have a drill bit in there stopping it. So pull the bolt out, and that linkage should just pop right off the power valve. You can just slide it out of the way. Take off the rad hose going down into the cylinder head. It shouldn't really have any water in it, but shove a rag in it. Then undo the carb side of the boot. Same with the back, going to the airbox. And I like to get the whole entire subframe and airbox and everything out of the way. You kind of need to get the carb off, but what I do is don't remove the top bolt. Take off the bottom 2 subframe bolts, like I'm doing here, and with the boot loosened, obviously, it should just pop right off, and you can flip the whole subframe right up out of the way, like that. Then carefully yank the carb out, set it off to the side. Next, loosen the cylinder base nuts. Now, you can do the cylinder head first. I don't know why I did this kind of bass-ackwards, but it's still 6 in one, half dozen the other. I started with loosening the 4 big cylinder base nuts off before I touched the head. As you can see here, now I'm moving on to the head. It doesn't really matter. And next, to get the cylinder head off, just give it a light tap to break the seal free, and it should just pop right out of there. And just careful removing it, don't want to drop too much shit down there. Next, grab some rags, you'll need them in a second to get the cylinder off. Just put them off to the side, keep them clean, and just wiggle the cylinder off the 4 base studs. Carefully slide it out, and as you can see here, I'm grabbing the connecting rod and trying to pull the piston down in the cylinder to allow myself enough clearance for the head studs to clear the frame. Otherwise the cylinder physically won't fit out of the bike. Just take your time doing this. Just move the piston to the very bottom of its travel, bottom dead center. And as you can see, you gotta kind of bend and pry shit out of the way, and it comes free pretty easily. And here's where you use your rags. Just shove them under the piston on top of the crankshaft, just to catch any debris or circlips that you might drop on this next step here. Then go ahead and remove one of the circlips. You can use a pick or a tiny flat screwdriver is what I'm doing here. Set it off to the side. You're not going to reuse it. Go to the other side, give the wrist pin a little push, and it should just slide right out of there, enough for you to lift the piston off the rod, like so. Next, grab your new rings and go over to your cylinder. This is measuring ring gap, and you should do this every time you do the top end. Figure out which way is up. Normally, if you look at the ring, you'll see these tiny little letters near the split, and those always go up. So use your old piston or new piston, whatever you got, just to seat it in the cylinder. You normally want to do this in about 3 spots, about halfway in the cylinder at the top and at the bottom, but I'm just showing this quickly in the center of the cylinder. And the manual will give you a minimum and a maximum ring gap, and as you can see here, I have 3 feeler gauges, so just going through them each, trying to figure out which is the nicest fit that you shove into the gap in the ring, and that is how you measure ring end gap. Grab yourself your favorite 2-stroke oil, dump a little bit into the cylinder, rub it around evenly and coat the cylinder walls. You don't need to put ridiculous amounts in there to where it's dripping out of it. It'll give your poor fresh top end on your bike a hard time starting, and it'll smoke like a bastard if you drown the thing in oil. Just enough to cover the cylinder walls to ease the install. Go over and with piston at bottom dead center again just to get the clearance. Shove the cylinder in and start sliding it down over the studs, all the while lifting up on the piston. And as you can see, I'm using my thumbs to compress the rings. And you can also use the Kickstarter to, when you can't use your hands anymore, to push the piston upwards to get it to slide into the cylinder nicely. And it should just sit down nicely like that. And give it a few rotations with a quick Kickstarter, make sure everything moves up and down nice and smoothly, and go ahead and start reinstalling the base nuts. Now there is a torque for these. I could post it later on. I didn't have a good enough crow's foot to properly torque these at home, so I just hand bombed them. You'll know when. Just make sure you torque them down in a cross-sectional pattern to squish the gasket properly. And next, grab some brand fresh new O-rings and put them in their little bosses on the top of the cylinder. Make sure they're seated nicely in there. Install the cylinder head cover over the studs and tighten it down. These also, I they have little copper washers, as you can see, and just taking a little bit of Scotch-Brite here to clean some corrosion and shit off them before installing them. Make them look nice. I also put just a tiny bit of fogging oil to help with corrosion. You don't need much, just put a tiny little bit. That's just a personal thing to help with corrosion. So yeah, you tighten those down. These are easy enough to get a torque wrench on, so I did. I could post the torque later on. Torque them down again in a cross-sectional pattern like you would on a car wheel. You can put the rad hose back on, tighten it down, don't want any leaks. Next you can put the carb back on, slide it under the boot, making sure that locator tab or tang on the carb fits nicely into the cutout in the boot. You want to make damn sure you tighten that back down. Next, what I like to do here, I didn't show it, but I spray a little bit of oil on the airbox boot right where it mates with the carb to help this slide over the carb a lot nicer when you pivot it back down. It slides on just fine. Give the airbox boot a little push and the rubber seats on nicely, and tighten that back down. Then you can go ahead and put away the crankcase breather vent. Just reroute it back through its zip tie and tighten it down. Reinstall the lower subframe bolts and tighten them up. Don't forget to tighten up the top one, the long one. You can rehook up the power valve linkage with the bolt, making sure to use that drill bit again. Put a side load on it as you're tightening it up, so you don't mess up the linkage. Then reinstall the cover. Reinstall the headstay with the 3 bolts. You can put the exhaust back on after that. Again, I made this a little hotter than it had to be by leaving the muffler on. Put the gas tank back on, tighten it down, hook the gas line back up, make sure you turn the gas on. Fill it up with some coolant. Check for leaks after you do this too. That weep hole, the bolt there should be tightened. Open the garage door so we don't kill ourselves, even though it does smell really good. Turn the gas on and give it a try. And it's normal for them to smoke like a bastard when they first start up. Remember, we did coat the cylinder quite heavily with oil, so she runs pretty rich for the first few seconds. Anyway, hopefully this video helps some people out. I don't think I've ever seen a first-person view top-end rebuild on YouTube before, so maybe it helped a few of you guys out. If so, give it a thumbs up, and thanks again.